Aussie housing crash, 70% like in Japan. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian Heiser here and welcome to another episode of Heiser Says. Grab your piping hot stein of coffee and your jacket and rug up from icy cold Brisbane at the moment. And let's have a look at this article where, finance host from the ABC, Alan Kohler, is, making comparisons to Australia and Japan and how their property sector spectacularly crashed 70%. Now, could that happen here in Australia? Is this a foreshadowing of what's going to happen? Will everyone who's waited finally be vindicated? And will all those investor bros get, their comeuppance? And will people smugly be able to come in and buy these properties at a bargain? Now, I know that's a nice fantasy. I know a lot of people like that and are hoping for that. Some people, sadly, are depending on it as their only chance to get into property. But there's a fundamental difference between Australia and Japan. Now, I've only spent a short stay in Japan. I had a crazy stopover overnight in Tokyo, and I went to the red light district with a friend, and we drank and had a great time and went to some nightclubs and saw some architecture. It was awesome. But there's the tourist life in Japan, but what about trying to immigrate over there? Okay, it's different, not like Australia. And I would argue that's a fundamental difference between Australia and Japan. Their population growth has tanked, and they're not doing anything to bring more people in. We're here in Australia, our population growth is going to be all about just opening the floodgates. We've seen the Liberal Premier of New South Wales call for 2 million new migrants coming over, and Labor don't seem to be opposed to it. What do you reckon, everyone? Remember, there's many powerful lobbying groups calling for support for the property sector, and immigration is a big part of that. The university sector as well is highly dependent on international students. So, and comparing Australia to other Asian countries, an English language degree in Australia is still going to carry a lot of weight in many of those countries. And there are potentially, racial issues going to other Asian countries and potential discrimination there. So, let's have a look at this article and let's see what Alan has to say. Should we all be worried? Is this writing on the wall? So, Australian residential land value to GDP ratio is now higher than Japan at the height of the 1989 bubble. ABC finance host Alan Kohler has shared a scary housing chart after Australia passed a grim milestone dating back to 1989. So, likening the current situation to Japan before the lost decade crash that saw prices drop 70%, I'd imagine a lost decade in Australia for our housing would simply be a decade without any growth. What would people do? And finally, another scary, depressing way to look at house prices in Australia, Kohler said at the end of Wednesday's segment. As a percentage of GDP, all residential land in Australia is now worth more than all Japanese land was in 1989. So is he comparing all residential Australian land to all land in Japan? So the hyper-expensive commercial stuff in Tokyo? And that was one of the great bubbles of all time, followed by one of the great crashes of all time. But this time will be different, of course. During Japan's property bubble, the ratio of residential land to GDP hit a record of more than 330%. We've just beaten that record in Australia, which is not a great starting point. Dr. Philippa Hofflin of Lazard Asset Management told Livewire Markets this weekend. Well, is that taking into account for inflation? Our land values, GDP. It would take account of inflation because those figures will both be inflated up. So, it certainly didn't work out well for Japan. Dr. Hofflin also noted that during the period before the global financial crisis, in the US, property prices rose by the equivalent of 60% of GDP. Well, we've just done a lazy 100% plus in 3 years, he said. Really? Has your property gone up 100% in 3 years, guys? Residential values rose by 2.5 trillion over the last 3 years. They hit over 10 trillion at the start of this year. And you can see this dwarfs really any other asset price in the country. Are they taking account the new land that's been developed, that's been opened up in that period as well? Has that been taken account there? Surely that will make an impact. Japan experienced a major boom in the early 1980s and saw stocks and property explode in value, with skyrocketing asset prices blamed on easy credit and rampant speculation, coupled with a lax central bank, as Avatrade notes. Land and real estate prices rose by nearly 170% between 85 and 1990, while stock prices doubled between 87 and 1990. The bubble began to burst at the end of 89 when the Bank of Japan started to sharply raise interest rates in an attempt to curb runaway prices. See, almost similar to what our Reserve Bank is doing now. We've had years of just, the cash rate going down, 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 and there we go. We've had two increases. Two increases since what? 2010? 2011? When are the last time we've had increases? It's been so long. So yeah, that's why it's news. So asset prices subsequently crashed, leading to a period of economic stagnation from 91 to 2001, referring to the lost decade. Japan's stock market wiped out, losing 60% of its value between 89 and 92. Despite the equities bloodbath, the Bank of Japan continued to aggressively hike rates due to the resilience of real estate prices, which finally began to fall in 91. In June 91, the Bank of Japan rapidly reversed course and began slashing interest rates again. And the following year, the Japanese government kicked off a series of massive and ultimately ineffective stimulus packages. But by then it was too late. The economy was already in a downward spiral. Japan was gripped by both a credit crisis, with banks cutting back on lending despite lower rates set by the Bank of Japan, and a liquidity trap as households and investors held onto cash. Land and property continued to plunge over the decade, ultimately falling by 70% by 2001. The Nikkei index dropped below 8,000 points in August 2003, down from a peak of just under 40,000 at the end of 1989. So could we see this happening to the ASX? Property declines as RBA delivers a shock hike. Who is shocked by this hike? You tell me in the comments, guys. Do you know people? Okay? Do you meet randoms out there who were shocked by this? Are people really shocked? I still think that couple in that article we looked at from news.com, I think they were actors. I'm sounding like bloody Alan Jones, aren't I? But come on. How can you be shocked at rates going up? Maybe you don't follow the news? Could that be it? Maybe TikTok? The Reserve Bank of Australia shocked markets. No, it didn't. On Tuesday didn't shock many people. Didn't shock YouTube viewers with a higher than expected 50 basis point increase to bring the official cash rate to a 0.85%, so 85 basis points. It came after the Australian housing prices marked their first decline since September 2020, falling by 0.1% in May, according to CoreLogic. Annual price growth has fallen from 24% just 6 months ago to 14% now. Several banks had already forecast drops of between 5 and 15% by the end of 2023. But Tuesday's shock move has some experts warning prices could crash up to 25%. Aren't we going to get the 70% like Japan? Come on. So, writing for news.com.au, David Lenwell-Smith and Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business noted that before this week's decision, most economists were forecasting the cash rate to peak at 2.5% in the middle of next year. They're now predicting another 50 basis point hike in July. The futures market is even more hawkish, predicting the RBA will lift the cash rate to 3.5% by May 2023. Remember when Lowe was saying he wouldn't raise rates until 2024? Remember that, everyone? Good times, eh? Remember that? So, with both mortgage demand and consumer confidence facing heavy falls on the back of rate rises, the RBA risks sending house prices into a tailspin if it hikes as aggressively as economists, let alone the market, are forecasting, they wrote. The futures market forecast 3.5% OCR would crash the housing market, with real housing prices falling by around 25% in real terms and by more than 30% in nominal terms under the RBA's modelling. Well, let's have a talk about this. So we're talking 25%. Okay, so no mention of immigration demand increasing as a point of difference compared to Japan. There's a monoculture, ethnically, not ethnically diverse, ethnically uniform country. You can't compare it to a multicultural country that actually goes out of their way to attract people to come here, to address shortfalls in our own population growth. I think long term that's going to have an impact. And here in Japan, we're talking about 10 years. That's a lot, decent time period. Their birth rate has plummeted. It's plummeted. They're not at replacement level. They're going to reach a whole lot of problems over there. If you're a white man, you marry a Japanese woman, she takes your kid over there, you're screwed, guys. You're really screwed. It's different. Okay? Now let's say we fall by 25%. Let's have a look. I'm going to bring up a chart here. Let's look at asking prices in Sydney. Okay, Sydney. We'll go here. Let me reload this. Let me open up an Excel. And what are we looking at here? We're saying, okay, we've got 1.5 million. So if we're dropping, 25% of 1.5 million. Hang on, let me just do the maths so I get it right. Okay, 375,000. Let's say 400,000 to round it up. So we're going back to 1.1 million. Come on, how far back do we have to go? So 2019, guys. 2019, 2018. That's how far we have to go back to reach that. Now, I don't know about you, but 2019 Sydney property prices certainly weren't affordable. So for those of you that are hoping that this correction is going to be the opportunity to jump in the market, we're just returning to insane prices of before the pandemic, really. That's all we're returning to. So the insane intervention, because remember, this mess, I'll just remind you, was created by our good friends, the government, everyone. They came to the rescue. They kept zombie companies alive throughout the pandemic, guys. They, used JobKeeper, and huge percentages of workforce were completely supported by that. They've been juicing the market. The cash rate has been below emergency levels. 3% was emergency. Home builder, very effective in overheating the housing market. First home buyer grants. I remember when I wrote this, 88 grand was a lot. Now you've got, 200 grand in some parts of the country. You've got Labor now, so they're going to start owning parts of your home at 5 and 2% government loan guarantees from the Liberals. So there's not much difference between the two. Then you had negative gearing and super withdrawals. So all of this overheating in the market, and combine that with the whole housing supply issues, the not in my backyard crowd that claim to be worried about affordable housing, then will bitch and moan about any development near them, is going to be a problem. So, okay, if we get this fall they're talking about here, we're just back to 2019 levels in Sydney, and probably the same in other cities, guys. So, what do you reckon? Any of you at all surprised? Do you think property is going to fall that much? Or will the floodgates open and there'll be continued demand for it? Should Australia be compared to Japan or to Ireland? The yields people are getting on property still are beating the bond yields. Once bond yields are better than, which is essentially guaranteed money, although it feels like housing is guaranteed the way our government is. Once the yield on housing drops below bond yields, then we'll be like what happened in Ireland. We've still got a bit to reach that. What do you reckon? There'll be some people who will, well, they may get burnt. They may be in negative equity for a while. I can't see them being forced to sell if they can keep making their payments. You know, that would be, well, not in the best interest of the banks, would it? We'll have to see. They may get people to chip in more money. Then that might get a bit messy. Anyway, guys, let me know your thoughts and opinions on this one in the comments down below. Thank you all for watching. Like, share, subscribe to the channel. If you're a fan and want to support the channel, there are a few ways you can. You can financially support us by joining us on YouTube or Patreon, using any of our referral links, or contacting us if you need any architectural support. Take care, guys. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next episode of Heise Says. Bye for now. Oh, it's still insanely cold here in Brisbane, guys. It is just nuts at the moment. One time I regret being bald. I have to wear a beanie everywhere.